Magic is the best weapon type in Fire Emblem Fates. Being able to land hits from places your opponent can't counter, attacking on enemies' lower resistance stats, and the ability to counter pretty much any attack that comes your way makes it really hard for any other weapon type to compete. So who is the best magic user in Fire Emblem Birthright? It's Corrin. The answer to most questions like this is always going to be Corrin, but figuring out who the second best magic user is a lot more interesting, because the answer isn't what most people expect. When you think of mages in Birthright, you probably aren't thinking of Rinkah. She's completely unable to use magic for a long time. Most players just relegate her to being a mediocre physical attacker, or even more commonly, they give up on her combat prospects, and lean into the attributes that make her one of the best support units in the game. But it really doesn't take any special planning for her to quickly become one of the game's best combat units, and it's all thanks to her ability to use magic. So let's go over everything you need to know to make the most of your Rinkah, and stay tuned for when we show why every other magical unit in the game will usually perform worse than her. Let's get started. So Rinkah is one of the earliest joiners in Birthright, joining before the game starts in the Branch of Fate.
Yeah, unfortunately, it feels like Chapter 5 was designed to explicitly communicate her bad matchups. So she ends up with a decent start in Chapter 4, but then Chapter 5 is just awful for her.
Yeah, Rinkah is still going to be probably your best unit to put experience into in the Branch of Fates, because her main competition is going to be Kaze in Chapters 4 and 5, and Kaze is not a very good unit in Birthright, while both of us do think Rinkah is one of the best units to train in Birthright.
Yeah, so there's not any competition for her to get EXP there. The only other competition is Corrin, who hits the soft EXP cap so quickly that there's pretty much no reason to feed them once they hit it.
Rinkah does benefit the most from being used a lot in Branch of Fates because she starts with E-rank axes, meaning that she can only use the Brass Club until you have 20 combats with her. This means that she cannot use the Throwing Club or the Iron Club unless you have given her quite a lot of favoritism. And I will say, giving her the Throwing Club by the start of Chapter 7 will give you a way easier time raising basically the rest of your team by a significant amount.
Yeah, having just some form of 1-2 range, even if it's not amazing, is just really important. But not just that, you also want to be moving to C clubs as quickly as possible as well, because that gives you the +5 passive hit boost.
Yes.
Which is super important when you're axe locked.
She is stuck with the least accurate weapon type, and she has to make use of her strength stat, which is very high due to her class bases in Oni Savage. But her growth isn't the most impressive thing, but her damage output is really helped by her personal skill, which is Fiery Blood, which makes her deal 4 extra damage whenever she is at less than full HP. Now, this isn't really helped by the fact that her HP pool is not the highest even by Fate standards, having a base of 20 and a growth of 40% in Oni Savage. But Rinkah has such a high defense stat that most enemies won't be dealing very much damage to her in the first place, so not being at full HP is a lot less of a big deal for Rinkah than it is for most other units.
Yeah, and with the Fiery Blood active, her damage output gets very impressive. If you look at all of the Chapter 4 units, she will generally hit the hardest out of all of them while Fiery Blood is active. Sometimes the Strength boost Corrin can have more, but otherwise she does hit the hardest, and if she gets a single speed level up, then she can double Faceless with Kaze Para. And so with Fiery Blood active, if she's doubling, she just has best damage output.
And her chance to level up speed is actually pretty high at 55%, meaning that she doesn't require quite as much support as you might expect from one of the bulkiest units in the game, because very few units have such a high defense stat as Rinkah. She will be having a very easy time getting as much experience as you want to pour into her, because she can just go into range of as many enemies as she really wants most of the time and survive and eventually start killing them. So Rinkah is in a very good spot to start snowballing once you put in the investment to get her in a position to start outsetting all of the enemies.
Yeah, she needs just like a little bit of a push at first, but as soon as she gets that, she snowballs in a way that very few other units do, just because the ability to take 0 damage in Birthright is so good. And because her defense is as ridiculous as it is, it does not take her long to get to that position.
In Conquest, having too much defense might be a bad thing because in that game, enemies start to ignore you when they have an expected damage value of 0 in their combat forecasts. But in Birthright, this isn't an issue, so her massive defense stats will pretty much never be a problem outside of some AI manipulation that you might want to do. And you might also think that having too much defense and having enemies deal 0 damage to you might have bad synergy with the skill Fiery Blood, which requires her to have taken damage, but you can sidestep that requirement by just chugging an HP tonic at the first turn of the map and having 20 out of 25 HP, activating Fiery Blood on turn 1.
Yeah, and because her total HP value is so low at that point, if she gets like an incidental passive healing from like Azure or something, it usually won't even undo the HP tonic, so she gets to just sit at 5 HP missing for pretty much the entire map.
So when it comes to training Rinkah early on, you can get a really big push from the Branch of Fates. You can get a lot of experience just by killing Faceless in her joining chapter 4. While she does have very bad matchups in chapter 5, that comes with the incidental effect of when she misses, she still gains weapon experience, meaning that you can get 20 axe combats with her earlier than if she were to be hitting and killing the enemies, which usually is not a good thing, but in this one edge case, it's not the worst thing to be doing, I guess.
Yeah, like, if she misses, it's probably fine. Sadly, that map does have a lot of mages, so she can't miss too many attacks without problem, but she does take a lot of damage on the counter because her res is so poor. But it's mostly fine. Sadly, she does have much more important things to be doing that map, because, kind of unfortunately for Rinkah's combat, she has best pair-up in the game, probably, aside from the units with personal skills to boost their pair-up.
Having +4 strength and +2 defense in Oni Savage, regardless of how much investment she has, just makes her one of the best supporting units in the game, in addition to her impressive combat if she chooses to go that route. So you're being pulled in multiple directions, and sometimes having the best option to be in Ryoma's backpack kind of outweighs her combat performance.
Yeah, in a way, it's probably something that can't really be counted against her, because she's just the best at 2 different things. So it's hard to penalize her for being, such a good backpack, because personal pair-up bonuses are also purely hard stats. Oni Savage pair-up is amazing. And then there are so many units who do appreciate her passing Oni Savage to them.
The really big thing is the +2 defense that really does make a difference, because a lot of the units you get in early Birthright are really squishy. Think like Hana, think Hayato, Orochi. Those units really struggle to see more than 1, maybe 2 combats on a given turn. While if you slap Rinkah on them, maybe an extra defense tonic, and you can suddenly start getting like 3 or 4 or 5 combats once you take guard gauge into account and them doubling. It can make other units start snowballing really quickly for the same reasons Rinkah does. Having high defense in addition to high speed is one of the best combinations that you can have in this game.
Yeah, and she does give her personal defense as well immediately at C. So as soon as she gets any support level, it is 4 strength, 3 defense with pair up. And then once you promote her, that's 5 defense on pair up, which is crazy good. But it does mean she really needs EXP early on, because if you are going to use her as a pair up bot, promoting her as quickly as possible for that 2 extra defense is important.
Getting her a lot of experience isn't as difficult as you might expect. I have an entire clear of Chapter 6 that lets you feed the Camilla and Xander kills to basically whoever you want, regardless of their stats, and Rinkah is an option for doing that. So you can definitely get her to like level 8, level 9, maybe even level 10 if you give her way too much favoritism in Chapters 4 and 5. So it's not as hard as you might expect, but you do have to put some thought into how you ration your experience and not giving the kills to what might be the easiest units to feed them to.
Yeah, and Rinkah is probably the best choice for that in most cases. In chapters 4, 5, 6, you have like Kaze, who isn't the best, Azura, who actually is quite good to feed kills too, but those take even more setup than Rinkah's, Corrin, who's probably over-leveled, and your Servant, who isn't going to have much trouble leveling either because of how they work. So Rinkah ends up being just usually the best and easiest to feed stray kills to.
And that's not even mentioning that getting her to level 10 also unlocks the skill Shove, which in casual play might not be the most applicable skill, but when you really want to minimize your turn counts as much as possible, Shove can be very useful over the course of the entire game, letting you push a unit just a little bit further on turn 1, letting them get to a boss kill, or a place in the map where they can get into range of way more enemies just a little bit earlier so you can push further ahead. And sometimes you can even use Rinkah, placing her a bit further forward than another unit, pushing them back out of enemy range, and having Rinkah see the combat that would have killed the other units. You can find a lot of use cases if you're looking for them.
Yeah, big one that comes up sometimes if you're playing casually but not trying to go too fast. She can shove Azura after a dance to change the diagonal parity of your shelter dancing, which comes up occasionally. Because if you're performing a shelter dance, you can only target certain squares, but Rinkah can shift which squares you can target with it, which is cool.
But really, we've been talking about Rinkah for her physical combat and her support capabilities, but you clicked this video because you want to know why Rinkah is the best mage in the game. Well, Chapter 14 is the chapter where Ryoma joins and he starts to become your best unit, but Chapter 14 also is when you get access to the Bolt Axe, which is one of the best weapons in the game, having 14 might. It is kinda crazy, and the Oni Chieftain class line is considered a magical class because it does have access to tomes. It has the same magic stats as the Basara class, and Rinkah is already leveling up her axe rank a lot throughout the course of the game, meaning that she will probably be able to just use the Bolt Axe as soon as it gets dropped.
Yeah, and notably there are not many there aren't many axe users to begin with in Birthright. So unless you have reclassed someone into an axe using class, the only options for people who are likely to have a natural C rank in axes are Scarlet and Rinkah. And while Rinkah's magic isn't super impressive, her base of 2, with the +4 from the promotion bonus, and the +4 from Fiery Blood already matches what a potential Malignite Scarlet would have at base. So she ends up with just better magic than the only other axe user at base in the game.
And on top of that, she also has a lot of opportunities to gain experience. Not only does she have the entirety of chapters 4, 5, and 6 to get a lot of kills, the map where the Bolt Axe gets dropped is also one of the best opportunities to raise an axe unit in the entire game. Almost the entire right side of the start of the map is just Cavaliers that hold lances, and that chapter is also the first opportunity for you to buy from the second tier of shops, which gives you the Pike Rune Club, an axe which triples in might when it used against lances. So even if you haven't trained Rinkah up to that point, as long as she has D rank in axes, you will have a very easy time leveling her up, even if she hasn't gained a single point of strength, which is very unlikely.
Yeah, and because she has so much defense, the Cavaliers in that map, they have 13 strength and steel lances, I believe, so that's 23 attack. It's actually super reasonable for Rinkah to get to 23 defense, and then she can just farm the Cavaliers while taking 0 damage from them.
It is really impressive how well Rinkah can perform on that map. I have an entire set of videos giving an overview of how you might want to train an Oni Savage Hayato. Rinkah does basically all of that better, while having notably higher hit rates, on top of having just better strength and defense for most of the game.
Yeah, Rinkah's bases are pretty much just pure upgrade on Hayato, the big one being +4 skill, so anything that works for Hayato is going to work for her as well, so it's a super good option to just instantly train her up. The only thing is it does mean delaying her promotion and not using her incredible pair-up bonuses, which is a little unfortunate, but if you want her to be a good mage, then Yeah, you gotta train her.
Now, the skills in the Oni Savage Class line might not seem the best, but the one in particular that really stands out to me is Seal Resistance. Now, Seal Resistance works really well with Magic Rinkah because her magic stat really isn't going to be the best, but with Seal Resistance, that effectively gives +5 to her damage output against enemies that she didn't kill the first time she saw combat against them. So that can really help boost her damage against the more resistant enemies, and let her kill basically any enemy in the game after 2 rounds of combat. It's pretty impressive.
The bolt axe hits so hard, and Birthright enemies have such low resistance. Frequently, she can just one round with the bolt axe. But because of Seal Resistance, she also has the opportunity to switch to the Rat Spirit or the Horse Spirit in case she either needs more accuracy or more defense. And then she can just ignore the damage drop that switching to them would normally give because she'll debuff them with Seal Resistance.
Death Blow is largely useless because the weapons that you will primarily want to use on her once she's in Oni Chieftain are the Rat Spirit and the Bolt Axe, both of which cannot crit. Not that you'd really care about critting, because it's usually more valuable to maximize your guard gauge on a unit that you want to be sending in against 10 enemies on a given enemy phase. So not being able to benefit from Death Blow isn't really a big deal for what Rinkah is trying to do anyways.
Yeah, as good as the Oni Savage skills are, once she promotes, she basically stops learning skills. The only weapon that she would use that she can crit with is the Horse Spirit, but yeah, no, if you're using the Horse Spirit, you're using it for bulk, so you don't want to crit. But it won't be active most of the time, so it's not really a downside or anything, it's just a dead skill.
Counter, I guess, is funny. You can counter the 0 damage that you'll be taking from enemies and reflecting them back at your opponents, which, okay, it occupies a skill slot, and that's all.
Yeah, if it was counter magic, maybe it would do something, but it's not, so it just does not matter for her. She has way too much defense for it to ever matter, especially once she's promoted level 15.
Magical Rinkah is generally going to be significantly better than anything you want to do with her on the physical end, just because having the extra magic class base of Oni Chieftain does wonders for her damage output. So going into Blacksmith as her alternate promotion from Oni Savage usually is not the best idea, but she does get a funny skill, and that is Salvage Blow, giving her a luck % chance of obtaining the enemy's iron equivalent weapon if she kills them on player phase, which can be a bit of a boost to your economy, but her luck stat really leaves quite a lot to be desired, even in Blacksmith.
Yeah, so it's not great on her. The main appeal of the Blacksmith skills is that there are other units who can take really good advantage of them. Lancebreaker on Ryoma, for instance, is completely ridiculous, because now he can dodge the only enemy type that has hit rates on him. And then Salvage Blow being passed to a unit with particularly high luck is kind of nice, but Rinkah herself doesn't really have any use for them. It's just whoever she marries might get a lot of value out of them.
She does also have access to the other best class in the game, which is Ninja, but she actually doesn't really care about it. She gets a very large cut in her defense if she reclasses outside of Oni Chieftain, and that usually isn't what you want to be doing, especially since she already has access to very good 1-2 range in the form of the Bolt Axe and Horse Spirit and Rat Spirit while she's in Oni Savage. So switching weapon types to physical doesn't benefit her that much because her damage output usually is not going to change very much while taking a significant hit in the stat that really matters, which is defense.
Yeah, and especially because shurikens have such low might and ninja has such poor strength, going into ninja and switching to using shurikens is just really bad. Like, a Master Ninja Rinkah using the steel shuriken just flat out has less total attack than she would have using the bolt axe in Oni Chieftain. So it's not good, and then you're also hitting on the higher enemy defensive stat, all while taking a massive hit to your defense. Difference between Master Ninja defense and Oni Chieftain defense is 6 hull points. It's not good. Especially with her low HP, reducing her defense to the point where she's taking, if she takes 4 additional damage from an enemy, well, that's a fifth of her HP. That's not sustainable for her.
And one of the appeals of the ninja class to a lot of players is that it's really good at setting up kills for your other units. But Rinkah is already one of the best units at doing that because she can control her damage output using things like the throwing club or the rat spirit or the brass club to ensure that she just tunes her damage just right to not hit 1-round thresholds so that your other units can sweep in and get any kills that she missed out on. Going into Ninja, benefiting from the debuffs that shurikens get, isn't really doing that much more for her than just staying in Oni Savage and making use of Seal Resistance, because she is already going to be by far the best partner for setting up kills for any magical units in the entire game.
Yeah, and if it's for a physical unit, then they would be using her as a pair-up anyways. So there's just no benefit to going into Ninja with her.
I guess if you really want to do the memes, replicate Rinkah could be useful, I guess. Having a second unit that takes 0 damage from enemies, meaning you won't be hurt very much by having a shared HP pool between your replica and your original unit, I guess it could be nice. Having a second copy of the best mage in the game is not something that I would complain about, but is it worth spending 4 levels in Mechanist? Probably not.
Yeah, it's really just not worth it. She's perfectly fine as a combat unit, just going to level 19 in Oni Savage and then into Oni Chieftain, and then that's all she needs. It's such a good class line that it's hard to give it up.
But there are some other classes that Rinkah might want to dip into for skills, even if it's not the best class in the game in Ninja, because she does get Diviner from Orochi, and this really does help with her damage output if she's going the magical route. Because if you put 1 level in Diviner, you will get Magic +2, which can have a very big impact in letting her 1 round basically anything that she wants.
Yeah, and it's a really fantastic pairing as well to unlock Diviner, because Rinkah's early combat, she's doing fine defensively, and Fiery Blood gets her damage output fine, but she is just off of doubling a lot of enemies, and Diviner being a speed pair-up from Orochi helps her hit that. And then once she unlocks the Bolt Axe, it's both speed and magic, which will let her just kill enemies for free. So it's a really nice pairing to have already, and then it unlocks magic +2 for her.
While also unlocking the Oni Savage Class line for Orochi, which Orochi really likes, not dying to a stiff breeze and being able to make use of her high skill stats to make up for Oni Savage's lower hit compared to other classes, can be a very big benefit to Orochi.
And they also fight pretty well together on Orochi's side because Rinkah can seal resistance, enabling Orochi to just one-shot an enemy instead of needing to stack speed, which is also good for her. So they work very well together, and they both give each other pretty much the only classes that each one of them wants.
You probably won't be spending too much time in the Diviner class line unless you are going for Tome Fair. Tome Fair is a flat +5 damage whenever you are using a tome, which in Rinkah's case is probably going to be either the Rat Spirit or the Horse Spirit. You'll not be getting this bonus for the Bolt Axe, but this allows Rinkah to go for a more accuracy-focused build using the lower might weapons while boosting their attack with this skill. It can be very helpful in improving their reliability if you want to clear maps in fewer turns.
Yeah. Unfortunately, it doesn't, like you said, it doesn't apply to the Bolt Axe, which means that most tomes still don't hit as hard as the Bolt Axe does, even after Tome Fair's boost. But she does have a lot of weapons that she wants to use on the utility side, and this does let her, like, say, 1 round, like a Wyvern or something with low defense, or low resistance, even while using one of her low might tomes that has a utility.
This does require spending quite a bit of time in Omiyoji, which has some of the worst stats in the entire game, particularly in HP and defense. But Rinkah's naturally high defense will give her a way easier time leveling up in the class than basically any other unit in the game, just because most units with less defense will be able to take fewer hits than her.
Yeah, losing the 7 defense is pretty miserable, but it's still better than most units in Omnioji would be. It's just Omnioji is not a great combat class. If you aren't going for Tome Fair, you can just put her into Sara. She'll still learn Magic +2 that way, and it isn't quite so big of a hit to her defensive stats compared to Omnioji. Sara, I believe, only uses 3 defense going from Oni Chieftain rather than the 7 that Omnioji loses. And it actually has more HP. So defensively, it's fine. And so if you're not planning on going for Telfair, just go straight into Basara.
Basara notably also has +10 hits on Oni Chieftain, which can be very, very helpful if you are going for low expected turn counts on some of the later maps. The class also has the exact same magic stats as Oni Chieftain, so you are giving up access to the Bolt Axe, but if you're using tomes for their higher hit, yeah, it's not a bad option.
It's pretty solid. It is slightly less bulky, and you don't have the just nuke option that the Bolt Axe provides, but overall, it does give you a massive accuracy boost. So in situations where you have a big enough magic stack that you can kill something with the Horse Spirit, it's really good to be able to just get that +10 hit and keep your HP and defense intact. It's a solid class line for her.
And speaking of the accuracy boost, once she reaches level 15 in Basara, she gets access to Quixotic, which grants her +30 to hit at all times, which is kinda crazy. And she is one of the best recipients of it because the downside of Quixotic is that it boosts enemy hit rates as well, but her defense stat is so high that she really doesn't care about being hit for 0 or at most like 5-10 damage from the strongest enemies in the game. So this skill is almost pure upside on Rinkah. It's kind of crazy.
Yeah, getting +30 hit suddenly starts making just bolt axing things like totally reliable. And when she can use the bolt axe, then she can usually just kill. So it's crazy strong to have as an option, which makes it pretty worthwhile to level in Sara, especially if you're getting magic +2 out of it anyways.
The other diviner skills are less helpful on Rinkah. Future Sight grants a skill % chance of getting...
It's doubled EXP.
But only if you get the kill on player phase, which... This is Rinkah. She is going to be ending turn in front of 5 enemies and watching them all die. So you probably are not going to be getting very much mileage out of Future Sights.
Yeah, there's really no upside to it. You can try to go out of your way to get 1 player phase kill, or you could just get 2 enemy phase kills and get the same result. So it's a dead skill.
Rally Magic, I guess, can be useful. If you're getting Diviner on Rinkah, you will be deploying Orochi, and doing Rally Magic on Orochi might not be the worst use of your Rinkah action on a given turn, but usually it's not your best.
Yeah, Rinkah much prefers to be receiving Rally Magic from Orochi than giving it to her, so it doesn't come up too often.
And Rend Heaven is not very useful on her because, again, she's going to be spending most of her time using the Bolt Axe and the Rat Spirit, which cannot proc offensive skills like Rend Heaven. If she uses the Horse Spirit, her proc rates with Rend Heaven are not going to be very bad, but it comes with the downside of increasing damage dealt based on the opponent's magic stats. Now, some of the more resistant enemies in the game are going to be magic users, so Rinkah does get a bit more mileage out of the skill than you might expect, but it's still not going to be doing you that many favors when she already has seal resistance, so she can kill basically anything in 2 turns anyways without having to rely on this proc skill.
Yeah, and especially because her resistance is so poor that it's not usually worth having her fight magical enemies to begin with, so a skill that only works against them is kind of awkward. You'd rather just have her fight her good matchups instead of using a proc skill that makes her bad matchups better.
Rinkah does also get access to Spear Fighter, which, if you really want to do both seal defense and seal resistance on the same unit to make training Samurai Orochi something that you want to do for some reason, that's an option. Okay, Sure.
Yeah, she's probably the easiest person aside from a Gen 2 unit to get the double seals on, so if you want it, then like, it's an option. But overall, if you're going a support route with her, it's probably just going to be as a pair-up bot, so it's probably not worth it, but it is very funny.
Swap is also a side grade to shove, which does have its uses. Even if you don't have very much movement, you can go on to the very edge of the enemy's range and swap someone out of place so that Rinkah can take a hit while the unit that you're swapping does not, which can be applicable. Seal speed is also a funny option for if you really want to raise Orochi using Rinkah as your setup bot instead of Oboro, but like Oboro also exists. So like, just use Oboro.
Yeah, in most cases, swap is worse than shove to begin with, so it's not like technically there are applications where swap works instead, but they aren't common. And then yeah, if you're gonna raise someone to promoted level 5 in Spearmaster, it's probably gonna be Oboro. And seal speed is so niche that you would never need a second copy of it.
Spearfighter does still give her access to the Basara class, which, again, she does like quite a bit, but it also does not give her Magic +2 from the Diviner class, and the Rinkah and Oboro pairing is just a little more awkward than Rinkah and Orochi. Early game, it does help Oboro and Rinkah quite a bit, but once you get to the mid-game, Orochi usually ends up being a more desirable partner for Rinkah than Oboro.
Yeah, and even in early game, the fact that Orochi has innate 1-2 range is really helpful for setting up like dual strike opportunities and such. The main advantage of Oboro is just being a strength pair up before Rinkah has magic access, so it's not much of an advantage, and overall just the Orochi pairing is probably better for her.
And Rinkah notably also has access to getting supports with Kagero, and it's actually one of Kagero's better options because Kagero really wants extra hard stats in strength, defense, and speed, and Rinkah gives her exactly that. This is definitely a pairing that you are doing more for Kagero's sake than for Rinkah, but Kagero does benefit from this quite a bit.
Yeah, their classes are basically useless for each other, but they do have really solid pair-ups. Rinkah does like to get a speed pair-up, so Kagero provides that, and then Rinkah provides strength and defense for Kagero, so they give each other the stats they want, which is, it's something.
Kagero's generally recommended marriage partner is Hinata, who does basically the same thing, so Rinkah cannot provide the extra speed and defense that she provides as support. But this definitely is not your worst option for a Kagero backpack. Rinkah also really benefits from the +1 movement from being paired with Kagero. As a unit that is footlocked, she really wants to get into range of as many enemies as possible, and the ninja pair-up is really good at enabling that.
Yeah, speed and movement is definitely the best pair-up to be giving her, at least in the early game. Once it gets a little later, you might be in situations where you'd prefer more hard stats like magic. But right when they like first join and Rinkah's doing physical combat, yeah, speed and movement is as good as it gets.
Kagero does come a bit late because a lot of Rinkah's better performances come earlier in the game. You might especially want Rinkah to have a ninja pair-up in like the Ninja Forest, where she can go far ahead and ship everything with a throwing club, while Kagero joins right after that. So, probably not going to be getting the most value for Rinkah in particular, but still not bad.
Yeah, I mean, the classic is Rinkah and Kaze together for a reason. So,
yeah,
you know.
So moving on to her marriage options. One of the most popular things to do with Rinkah, and a reason why she is usually rated pretty low on the older tier lists, is she spends most of her time being a pair partner for Kaze, who, it's no secret that we consider him to be not very good in Birthright. Now, Kaze with a Rinkah pair-up can do quite a bit. He can definitely solo most of the game if you put a lot of investment in him, and Rinkah is probably the most important piece of that. Now, Kaze without the +4 strength, +4 defense of an Oni Chieftain pair-up, in addition to Rinkah's pair-up stats, with support, it really turns a incredibly mediocre unit into a unit that can make very solid contributions over the course of the game.
Yeah, Rinkah's pair-up being so good is definitely why she's rated so poorly by a lot of people, but it's a strange reason to rate a unit poorly. If she can drag even Kaze into being a good unit, it says a lot about what she's doing.
Kaze's performance really has less to do with Kaze and more to do with Rinkah in a lot of cases, but I think both of us have started coming around to the idea that even in early game, Rinkah isn't best used on Kaze, but she's actually better used on another dagger-using unit, which is Jacob.
Yes, Jacob's early game combat performance is pretty much just purely better than Kaze. In any situation where Kaze would use the Steel Shuriken for an attack boost, which is a lot because he's Kaze, Jacob can just use an Iron Shuriken and have purely better combat stats.
Jacob also has the benefit of having 6 move innately, while also having unrestricted movement on the desert map, because he is considered to be a magic-using class. So his ability to go further, do more things, while also having the utility of healing with staves, in addition to his aura for reducing damage taken by female units, makes him just considerably better for most of early game, which is when Kaze is at his peak. But Jacob just kind of outperforms him in quite a lot of cases.
And notably, while Jacob's late game performance as a combat unit does sort of struggle unless you do the crazy skill dipping with him, he's also a magic and speed pair up for Rinkah's late game. So the two of them work well together at pretty much every phase of the game.
The one notable map where Jacob might struggle a bit more than Kaze if fully invested in is probably going to be the ninja map, chapter 10, where Kaze has a much more direct path to one-rounding the ninjas, while Jacob has to do a bit more, just because his speed is a bit more lacking.
Yeah, the ninja map is one of the cases where Kaze can get away with just using an Iron Shuriken, at which point he has a speed lead. But normally Kaze's speed lead is pretty overkill, so yeah.
Now, Rinkah is still just going to be the best physical pair-up for most male units. The best example of this is, of course, Ryoma. Ryoma can go from being kind of mortal, because he can die in 2 hits from late-game enemies, to just becoming borderline unkillable, because you probably aren't going to be seeing combat with him against more than like 5 units, and Rinkah can go from him getting 2 shots to him getting 3 shots, even when he's not very highly invested in. And that can be extremely impactful.
Yeah, she's an amazing pair-up for him. Not only does she change like how many hits it takes to die, she gives so much strength that Ryoma can reasonably get to the point where he can just one-shot magic users, which is such a huge survivability increase on a unit who has Vantage, because the magical enemies that would be able to hit him hard enough to two-shot him now don't get to hit him at all. So he's now immune to magical enemies, he takes 6 less damage from physical enemies, and then she eventually gives him Lancebreaker, so he never faces more than 50 hit from any enemy type. At which point he's just invincible.
And Rinkah being an Oni Savage at base provides him with access to the Blacksmith class, which, as you mentioned, gives him Lancebreaker in addition to his ability to continue to use swords, which is probably the most important thing when choosing what class Ryoma goes into. Blacksmith is very similar to Master of Arms when it comes to stats, so Ryoma really is not losing out by very much by going into Blacksmith.
Yeah, the main statistical hit from Blacksmith to Swordmaster is actually in resistance, but because it also gives a strength increase, and because Rinkah's pair-up is so huge, it just makes those mage one-shots even easier to just completely nullify his resistance as a necessary stat.
And if you really want even more survivability on Rinkah, dipping into Samurai for 2 levels to get access to Vantage Like, it's something you can do, sure. She probably doesn't need it, but it is something you can do.
Yeah, unfortunately she's not a great user of it. She's either taking 0 damage because the enemy is physical, or taking such a huge quantity of damage from a magical enemy that she can't really exploit advantage.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, it is an option.
I guess Seal Strength can be funny for making sure that every physical unit deals 0 damage on the second enemy phase, which I guess can make her survivability even better.
Yep, it's largely overkill. Yeah, overall, definitely not worth it though.
Yeah.
That's one of the weirder things about Rinkah. As good as she is, leaving her native class line is just so bad for anything but Basara. It's such a huge hit to her performance that it's almost never worth it for a skill.
I know we usually just go over every single class and their skills, but they're all kind of bad. I guess Cavalier is actually a good one. It gives access to Great Knight, which does keep her axe access. It provides her with Elbow Room, which is a flat +3 damage in most tiles in the game. It provides her with Shelter, which allows her to move even further into maps than she normally would because of Shelter Singing. Is basically Paladin Sakura, but with even more defense. It's kind of crazy.
Unfortunately, Rinkah doesn't really have the raw magic necessary to kill things with a magic weapon in a physical class, so it holds her back a little bit to be in Great Knight. If you don't mind 2-round KOing, then she can seal res things as a Bolt Axe Great Knight and then kill them on the next round. But if you're 2-round KOing, it does sort of cut into the advantages of having a mount in the first place.
The big issue that she will have in that class is definitely going to be hit, because she will not have the option to switch to a tome like the Rat Spirits for the really big hit numbers. She is stuck with the Bolt Axe, which usually is not ideal for minimizing your expected turn count.
Yeah, especially because she is stuck in Great Knight, which is only 7 move instead of 8. So she only got +1 move, but then she lost access to her high accuracy weapons, and her high damage weapons still did lose quite a bit of power. So it's reasonable to go in for the skills, I think, if you are doing pairing, but I wouldn't want to stay in Great Knight with her.
Bringing access to Elbow Room and Shelter into Basara can be really good, though.
Yes, and Defender as well, because that's +1 defense. So it's a good set of skills to learn, but it's just a question of if she'll even need it.
And in most cases, she really doesn't. She does well enough with absolutely no investment that anything you're doing is because you want to make Rinkah just that little bit better. But unless she is significantly stat screwed, you probably don't need a big +3 in Elbow Room to make Rinkah do what you want her to do.
Yeah. So the marriage that's more likely to come up if you're trying to improve Rinkah herself is either Kaden or Hayato. If you aren't using Orochi, they can still give her that Magic +2 variant of Basara, which is something, and they are both speed pair-ups, so they do good for her. But yeah, pretty much any other marriage partner is being used to improve that partner, not Rinkah.
Rinkah is notably one of the better pair of partners for the meme Magic Kaden build, because she seals the resistance of every enemy that she fights on the first enemy phase, and when you switch to Kaden in Diviner or Onmyoji, he gets the boost in defense while also being able to just use the Rat Spirit and kill the enemies that have their resistance sealed. If you really want to do Magic Kaden, you kinda need to do it with Rinkah.
Even if you're not doing Magic Kaden, though, she does make a good option for him because he has a pretty huge HP pool, so giving him a defensive boost allows him to apply that defense boost to more combats. Obviously, his fundamental problems hold him back, but like most male units, Rinkah is just the best pair-up for him.
I guess Azama is another option. You can suffer through 3 levels in Priestess to get to Renewal. You probably don't want to.
Yeah. Renewal is also kind of a bad option on her because she does not want to be at full HP.
Yeah.
So learning Renewal and then immediately healing back to full HP turns off Fiery Blood. She would be completely unkillable with Renewal. I cannot imagine any enemy group in the game being able to take off more than a third of Rinkah's HP bar in one turn. But it's probably not worth it for the damage hit.
And like, Miracle exists. It's unlikely that Rinkah will be dropping into death range if you are choosing your encounters right. So it does nothing, but it exists.
Yeah, her luck isn't the greatest.
If you want to use Miracle in combination with counter magic, that can be something, I guess. But that also requires you to spend 4 levels in Priestess, which you really don't want to.
If counter magic weren't a level 15 skill, it would actually have a couple of applications. She does struggle to take down magical enemies both offensively and defensively, and so turning the large damage she takes into damage on them would let her take on the occasional sword, but it's just such a high level skill, it's not worth it.
And Rinkah usually wants to be the receiver of Rally Luck rather than the provider of Rally Luck. So I guess you can have it on her, but why? It never hurts to have more Rally Luck users, but Rinkah is going to be ending turns so far into the front lines and probably alone. So the value you're going to get out of that on Rinkah is not going to be very high.
And even if you aren't using Rinkah as a combat unit, still not good to have support skills on her, because if she isn't a combat unit, then she doesn't have spare turns, because she is such an important pair-up bot.
And it's not like any of the skills here will help her in being a pair-up partner. So she is just going to be staying in Oni Chieftain if you want to use her for support.
It's a little unfortunate, because it means that there's not quite as much shenanigans to do with her. But on the other hand, it's genuinely just an upside that everything that she wants to do, she gets in her native class set, besides one incidentally useful friendship. It means she takes far less effort to become a competent unit than basically any other combat unit.
The amount that you have to invest into Rinkah to make her amazing is probably less than every other unit in the game besides the pre-promotes, and you could argue maybe Shiso and Corrin.
Yeah. I mean, honestly, Corrin's probably even more high effort, because Corrin still needs to reclass to become good. Because Rinkah doesn't. And obviously the payoff's still better for, say, Corrin and Ryoma, but Rinkah is very easy to just make competent.
Yeah, so when it comes to her actual performance late into the game, she continues to perform incredibly well, even when you compare her against the other best magical units in the game. So if you were to spend your time training Orochi up to level 20 Diviner with Diviner's horrible base stats, what you get in return usually is not going to be comparing very favorably to Rinkah, having -7 defense compared to the lower for Rinkah, while her magic is only going to be 3 more with the Horse Spirits compared to Rinkah with the Bolt Axe and Fiery Blood active.
Yeah, so in terms of just total numbers, Rinkah is bulkier, she's faster, and her damage output is only slightly lower. It sort of seems natural to make this comparison of, oh, Rinkah has more defense, Orochi has a little bit more attack. But that isn't actually the full story here. Because stats are so modular in Fates, and because you can make a trade-off between stats whenever you want, Rinkah's super high defense means she does not need a defensive pair-up in every situation, whereas Orochi pretty much always will. So Rinkah can take buffs to her magic from, say, a Diviner pair-up or to a magic meal aren't necessarily compatible with the defense buff, and use her excess defense functionally as a magic stack. So when your just raw total of magic and speed and defense is as high as Rinkah's, it's just as good as having high magic to begin with.
And Orochi's speed is really going to hold her back, because most of the promoted enemies, once you get to like chapter 20 and above, once you get to the point where Birthright's difficulty curve starts ramping up, the promoted enemies usually have speed stats greater than 20. And Orochi's speed and pretty glaring lack of speed growth will really hurt her in the long run in her ability to double anything she wants. She pretty much needs a speed meal tonic pair up rally speed to double everything that she wants to, if she's even able to do that in the first place, in addition to having the +3 speed from the Horse Spirit, which you can pretty much never go without unless you are going for the funny one-shot builds, which are really, really hard to set up in the first place.
Yeah. So the end result is that Orochi needs both speed and defense fixed, whereas Rinkah needs just her magic boosted. And speed and defense is a really unfortunate combination to need fixed at the same time, and pretty much every mage besides the Onis needs that combination. Whereas Rinkah would prefer to fix her speed and magic, which are super easy to fix at the same time because Omni-Oji pair-up just does that.
Now, Orochi's appeal is her big skill stats. She has a very significant hit lead on Rinkah, having 19 additional hits, which can be extremely impactful, especially against enemies that are red. So you probably would prefer to have Orochi be killing the things like heroes and even the berserkers, who she won't be able to take as many hits from, but her reliability in just deleting the threats in one turn is going to be higher than with Rinkah. So there are definitely situations where combat Orochi is very useful, but the effort to get Orochi here is still going to be far, far greater than with Rinkah.
Yeah, and Rinkah's resistance skill is pretty terrible here. 11 res, 29 HP, and weapon triangle disadvantage from sorcerers is like close to getting one-shot levels of bad.
Yeah.
Obviously you can use tonics and such to fix that, but it would be a lot of work to get her out of 2-shot range, whereas Orochi doesn't really have that problem. But that's a pretty niche problem compared to the upside of having, 26 defense before applying any defense boosts. Physical enemies are a lot more common, and being a unit who hard counters physical enemies is a pretty strong thing to be.
When we do physical unit comparisons, having 20 defense is considered to be very impressive, because Master Ninja Shiso at the equivalent level has 19 defense. So Rinkah's lead over basically every other unit in the game is incredible.
Yeah, she is just so bulky. And then the units who you want that bulk for, Berserkers and Wyvern Lords and such, tend to have terrible resistance. So it's pretty easy to kill them even with a unit who only has 11 magic.
Now, if you want to look at another contender for one of the better magic units in the game, you're gonna look at Great Master Azama after he trained his Lancer rank in Sky Knight, which is quite a bit of investment because it does require you to spend your time with Azama building your Tsubaki friendship early game and grinding a lot of Lance experience. And Azama does have very impressive stats, having notably higher speed than Rinkah and being able to use the Bolt Naginata to have a significantly better matchup against the magical units with his higher resistance. But Azama is also still going to be less bulky than Rinkah when it comes to taking massive enemy phases with tons of enemies that are going to chip down at that higher HP stats quite a bit faster with his 4 or less defense.
The additional speed that Azama has does let him double some stuff without using a speed pair-up, but not using a speed pair-up means he gets to use a defense pair-up, which brings him up to Rinkah's defense. So the end result, once you give Azama a defensive pair-up like an Oni, and Rinkah a magic and speed pair-up from an Omni-Oji, is that Rinkah has the same AS, the same defense, and more magical attack than him.
Yeah.
So she ends up just having a better spread of combat stats than him, aside from the soft stats, where it's not like his are very good either.
Of course, the other mages are still going to be significantly better at Rinkah at killing other magic-using enemies, but Rinkah is just so much better at the rest of the field, which is most units that are your enemies in the game, that Rinkah still compares very favorably.
Especially because Bushido gives you so many ninjas, and ninjas are basically a dedicated mage-killing class, even if that's not usually how they get used. It's not like mages are particularly hard to deal with, so a unit that's countered by them isn't really in a bad spot.
Another one of your magic users that you get early on is going to be Sakura, and we're not even going to mention Omni-Oji Sakura because the combat stats just really aren't there, because the defense stats will not exist. But once you get into Sakura's better combat classes, the first being Basara, Sakura does put up quite a fight. Now, having 3 higher speed and 3 higher magical attack while using the horse spirits to boost her bulk is pretty impressive. She also has the extra utility of providing the quiet strength aura, which can provide supports to your other units if you want to place her in a supporting position. So she does have quite a bit of utility.
Yeah. It's a close comparison. It runs into the exact same problem that Azama ran into, of that Sakura needs to use something to patch up her defense in order to match Rinkah's defense, which then gives Rinkah the opportunity to use any pair-up she wants to beat Sakura in another category. But Sakura's soft stats, because of her completely ridiculous luck, do give her a notable edge over Rinkah in some places.
The extra 16 hit is pretty big. That's almost Orochi levels of hit. It's kind of crazy. And the fact that she's using the horse spirit, which can allow her to actually get real avoid numbers, rather than the bolt axe, which actively reduces your avoid, is really big in allowing her to have pretty good chances of success in taking less damage than Rinkah, especially against enemies that she will have weapon triangle advantage against.
And her huge luck means that she can very frequently zero out even Berserker crit, but it's still a lot more work to get to this position than Rinkah, and it is just a side grade. She's trading hard stats for soft stats here. So it's twice as much work for a unit who's roughly equally good at combat.
Now, if you want to talk about the magical unit that has the highest potential impact on your expected turn count, that would probably be Paladin Sakura, as we have gone over before. And Paladin Sakura is just incredibly impressive because she has 9 movements.
It's 8 movement and Paladin, but then usually her S support partner is going to be giving her +1.
Along with access to Shelter, which can enable Shelter Singing to allow Sakura to move even further forward into maps than Rinkah could ever hope to without spending a use of the Rescue Rod. So if you want to clear maps as fast as possible with a magic unit, Sakura is going to be the option that you use. But even this, probably one of the best units at holding forward in the entire game, does come with some shortcomings compared to Rinkah, and the big one is the defense stats.
Yeah, this time at least, Sakura does have enough of a magic lead that she's still maintaining her magic lead even with a defensive pair-up, but defense is still more important to have than magic overall, because once you're hitting the magical thresholds, that's it, you're done. There's no more need for magic. But you do need to still be stacking defense in order to survive bigger enemy phases. So really all she has left over Rinkah then is her accuracy, which she does get to keep her accuracy and her crit avoid, but switching to using the Bolt Naginata means she no longer has the avoid lead.
And Sakura being further ahead of your other units in most maps also comes with the side effect of it's harder to provide Sakura with support in healing or rallies, which can sometimes make Sakura less able to perform her tasks than someone with more stats. Her stats are still going to be probably as good as you will ever need them to be, but if RNG does not come in your favor when it comes to Sakura's stat growths, she might struggle a bit.
Right. And it's another case where we found a unit who can move further than Rinkah and hit harder than her, which is a nice benefit to have at some cost, but that's not even considering the fact that Sakura needed a heart seal and a partner seal and more weapon rank training than Rinkah and an S support to get to this position, whereas Rinkah got here just basically automatically. She just got leveled up, which is about as small as investment gets in Fates.
Now, as we move on to our final magical comparison, we have here Oni Savage Hayato. Now, the other units that we've looked at come with pretty significant trade-offs in defense in particular, while it is possible to make Hayato appear to be strictly better than Rinkah if you want to spec him this way. He does have leads in basically all stats except for skill. The speed will always be about even when it comes to comparisons at an equivalent level because their speed growth is exactly the same. But Hayato's stats in every other stats are going to be slightly higher.
He's just a slight improvement on Rinkah in pretty much every area, notably in the magic stat because he's, an actual mage and not a physical unit LARPing as a mage. But even then, it's for how much extra work Hayato needs, because he basically has Rinkah's base stats, but several chapters later, you would expect more of an improvement, and really the big difference is just he gets to use the horse spirit while hitting he gets to use the rat spirit while hitting just as hard. And unfortunately, in situations where this much magic is unnecessary, Rinkah can still switch the rat spirit and the horse spirit and be just as good, if not better. But most of the time, Hayato is going to perform better because he'll just be Herb, but he gets to use a better weapon.
There are a lot of trade-offs that come with training Hayato, because he does require either the first heart seal in the game or quite a bit of investment banked up so that you can use one of these second sets of heart seals, and piling all that favoritism into Hayato in order to get someone that performs about as well as Rinkah in most situations. Now, Hayato is probably one of the better users of the horse spirit, which can boost his 27 defense to 30 defense. He does take a little bit of a hit to his magic attack, but in many cases that won't matter quite as much when you are standing there and taking all the hits and refusing to die because enemies deal 0 damage to you. You can have as many tries as you want to land your hits, and it doesn't really matter if you hit them or not.
Yeah. In terms of horse spirit combat, they both become invincible and get the job done eventually. It's just the way they do it is a little bit different. The horse spirit has pretty bad innate hit, so Hayato does struggle to hit with it, but he gets infinite tries, whereas Rinkah struggles to kill with it, but she'll eventually seal res them into kill range. So they both do the same thing with the horse spirit, just in a slightly different way.
So I think it's pretty clear that if you were looking in a tier list context, Rinkah would probably be the best of the mages and birthrights when you're not looking at Corrin, who is better than most units at most things. She just has the best payoff to investment ratio of most units that you get in the game, and her payoff is extremely good and filling a role that most units will not be able to.
Yeah, it's sort of ridiculous that ninjas are designed to be these sort of anti-mage units that we stack to make them fight other things, whereas Rinkah is just seemingly designed to be an anti-physical unit. And when 90% of the enemies in the game are these physical attacking, hard-hitting units that have no resistance, it's pretty ridiculous how hard she counters them. And so she's an incredible combat mage, and all she needs is just basic training to do it.
So if you've only used Rinkah as a Kaze backpack, I hope this video has opened your mind to the greater possibilities that exist with this unit. She can do so much more than enable one of the lower end units of this game.
Yeah, Rinkah can, as a support unit, enable any unit to be just the best physical unit you have because her support options are so good. She's also just an incredible combat unit, and if you're going for turn count stuff, she's an important piece of the movement puzzle because she's the first one to get shoved. So no matter what you're trying to do and what you're trying to build her to be, she is one of the best options for it. Just a fantastic unit in every area.
Okay, is there anything else you might want to add? Anything you want to plug at the end of this video?
I mean, I guess I'll do my usual plug. Check out my YouTube channel. It's Septastar on YouTube. Yeah, at this point, I think I'm actually quite close to hitting 1,000 subscribers. I haven't done too many uploads lately, but I will probably be getting back into it at some point. So yeah, check me out. Yeah, and thanks for giving me this option to plug.